So the next subsection after the introduction, context, and background section is going to be our theory relevant to our research questions. And this is going to be the largest portion. Right? This is where we are really going to prove that we know what it takes in order to be an expert in this area. Right? So when we think about this, right, this says theory, but we're going to have multiple theories associated with that. And by theory, we're just simply thinking now, like, what explains why we expect things to happen. Okay? So as we look through there, we're going to have our hypotheses associated with this. So we have our research problem. We have things in mind as far as what we're going to study. So what do we need to know with regards to how this works? So we'll go back to this neuropsych performance, right? And looking at the impact test in a group versus taking the test individually. Right? So we talked about head injuries before with that in our context. So this was the context. Now we are looking for things that don't try to answer our question, but are part of our question there, right? So when we look at this then, obviously this is a concussion assessment tool. So we need to discuss the theory of concussion assessment, right? Same thing, we need to discuss neurological processing. We need to discuss concussion management, right? And then we need to discuss group performance. Notice that when we get to this, we have only left a couple of different things, neuropsych testing and team management, right? These are the very specific things that are going to discuss the impact test and then specifically how they're administered. Right? These are very specific just to our question, right? With that, these are probably the most specific things on our list. This was the most broad. Everything in the middle becomes a theory. So we need to understand concussion assessment in order to understand our question. We need to understand how people perform differently in groups to understand our question. We need to understand neurological processing, right? And so on and so forth. So when we go to this and we start to make our outline, right, we really need to focus on outlining, right? How is this going to make sense, right? So we need to, again, start broad and work to more narrow, okay? There will be one exception. Somewhere in here, we are going to apply something new. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean by this to begin with, right? So the most broad component that we went through was neurological processing. So we need to understand, if we go back to here, how does critical thought, recall, memory, brain function, how does this work? Explain neurological processing to me, right? Next on there would be concussion management. Right? We have to understand how we manage concussions all the way through. So you can see here, concussion identification, treatment planning, return to play. This makes sense because concussion injury identification, right, is immediately then going to lead to concussion assessment, right, which is our next aspect. But see here where we have the something new, right? So we are going to describe something different that is outside of this normal process that people have looked at, right? We have neurological processing, we have concussion management, we have concussion assessment, but what is this new thing that we come through, this is going to be group performance. So now we're going to go to a more broad topic, right? Looking at social anxiety, attention things, support systems. These are things that might explain why there would be differences associated with this group. So we're always going to have this something new component within our literature review, that we're adding a new outside theory to the area of concussion assessment to explain why there might be something to look at there. Why taking a test in a group compared to individually, why that might be different. And the reason we think it might be different, because we know there are differences with performance within group. Oftentimes with this, whether it's due to distraction or social anxiety, group performance is lower than individual performance. And if, looking here, group performance is lower, within the context of concussion assessment, if we're comparing baseline data, right, that has been decreased due to something like social anxiety, and we compare that to injury data that is normal, right, because it does not occur in group, this might end up looking too much like each other, and we would not see the differences, which would affect our concussion assessment, which would affect our understanding of concussion management, which would affect our neural processing. So what we are not doing here, though, I'm going to circle this and make a big no, right? What we're not doing that, looking at specific articles that address our question, right? These are theory, right? So most of this would be the same for all concussion research, right? This would be a similar background and theory for all concussion research that was going there, right until we get to this something new, right? And this is somewhat incomplete, right? Because this neurological processing component will also probably come down here, and we would spend more time talking about concussion assessment specifically, right? Looking at this, we have the different aspects, but we would specifically spend more time looking at concussion assessment that may then include neuropsych testing, right? So we can look at neuropsych testing as the beginning and that transfer of that. So when we get into the concussion assessment, we will lead right into what would be the natural next step, which would be neuropsych testing, right? So we will pick up there next time with our next section.